Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going deep on something really transformative, especially if you lead a team or want to someday.
The power of curiosity.
Exactly. We're using an insightful article on LinkedIn by executive coach Miguel Nogueral,
It's called The Transformative Power of Genuine Curiosity in Leadership.
and it's not just about asking any old question.
Right. No girl's advocating for a real shift in mindset
Leaders focusing less on having all the answers.
and more on asking the really insightful ones.
Exactly. The article says that the leaders who truly stand out are often the ones asking the most insightful questions.
Not necessarily those with all the answers.
Makes you think, huh? Like all those times I've gotten stuck, assuming I knew the best approach already. What if I'd been more curious?
Easy to fall into that trap, especially when you're under pressure to perform.
Yeah.
But a leader who's genuinely curious is signaling to their team that it's okay to not have all the answers
It creates a safer space for exploring new ideas.
and approaches.
Totally flips the script on command and control leadership, doesn't it?
It does.
Instead of being expected to know everything, you're actually empowered to embrace not knowing.
Precisely.
And that can have a ripple effect, right?
Absolutely. If the leader is demonstrating curiosity, it encourages the team to do the same. And that's where the magic happens.
You start to see a culture of continuous learning and innovation.
Exactly.
No Girl has this great quote: leaders who embrace curiosity and thoughtful questioning drive innovation, uncover new opportunities, and empower their teams to solve problems creatively.
Wow. It really is powerful. When you cultivate curiosity, you become more observant, more attuned to those subtle details or emerging trends that others might miss.
And those often hold the key to breakthroughs.
They do.
Okay, so let's get practical.
Well,
The article talks about how curiosity can be applied in coaching employees.
this is something everyone can benefit from.
Even if you're not in a formal leadership role,
Hmm.
we all have opportunities to mentor or guide others.
Imagine you're coaching someone struggling with a project. Instead of just giving them a step-by-step solution, what if you ask them, what are your thoughts on how to approach this challenge? Or, what are you hoping to achieve with this project?
That's much more empowering.
It is.
It invites them to think for themselves and own the solution.
Exactly. It shifts the dynamic from telling to guiding, and that can be incredibly motivating. Instead of just following instructions, they're actively engaged in problem solving. But there's a catch.
Let me guess. It only works if you're truly listening to their answers,
Yes.
not just waiting for your turn to speak.
You got it. Active listening is crucial. It's about putting aside distractions, reflecting on what the person is saying, and asking clarifying questions to make sure you truly understand their perspective.
Active listening is something I've had to work on. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking you're listening when you're actually just formulating your response in your head.
Hmm.
It reminds me of this time.
Hmm.
Well, let's just say it involves a very important client, my phone, and a lot of awkward silence.
Oh, I think we need to hear this story. What happened?
Okay, so picture this. I'm in a meeting with this client who's considering a major partnership with our company. It's a big deal. I'm so focused on what I'm going to say next, on making sure I hit all my talking points, that I completely miss a crucial detail the client mentions. And to make matters worse, my phone starts buzzing with a notification right in the middle of their explanation. It was mortifying. I learned my lesson the hard way that day.
Oof, I can imagine. But it's a great example of how even the most well-intentioned people can stumble when it comes to active listening. It's a skill that requires constant practice and awareness.
Absolutely. And it makes me wonder, how can we get better at not just hearing, but truly understanding what others are saying, especially when we're in a leadership role where that understanding is so critical?
That's a great question, and it's something Nogueral addresses in the article. He introduces two really interesting frameworks for putting curiosity into action, and they both involve asking very specific types of questions. The first one is called the question burst technique, developed by Gregersen. He's an expert on disruptive innovation.
So not just any old questions, but questions that shake things up a bit. This sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
It's all about tackling a challenge by bombarding it with questions.
Okay.
But not just any questions. The goal is to ask disruptive ones that challenge assumptions and help you see the problem from completely new angles.
So we're not talking about surface level questions here.
No.
We're going deep,
Exactly.
trying to uncover those hidden blind spots.
Gregersen's technique involves focusing on a specific problem and then brainstorming as many questions as you can about it without trying to answer them right away.
So you're giving yourself permission to be curious,
Yes.
to explore all those what ifs and whys without the pressure of finding immediate solutions.
Precisely. And once you have that treasure trove of questions, you can start analyzing them for insights.
And see where they lead you.
Often, the questions themselves reveal the path forward.
The article gives an example of a company using the question burst to tackle employee turnover.
Something a lot of companies struggle with.
For sure. They started with a simple question. How can we address the challenge of so many employees leaving?
But instead of jumping to solutions, they spent time generating a flurry of questions. Things like, what assumptions are we making about why people leave? And what if we completely redesigned our onboarding process?
It's like they were forcing themselves to think outside the box,
Yeah.
to challenge those ingrained beliefs about what causes turnover.
Exactly. And by doing so, they uncovered a critical insight. Their onboarding process was impersonal and lacked follow-up, leaving new hires feeling disengaged and more likely to leave.
It's amazing how a simple shift in questioning can lead to such a profound realization.
It is.
And they actually took action based on that insight, right?
They did. They revamped their onboarding process, introduced a mentorship program, and guess what? They saw a significant decrease in employee turnover.
Really? How much?
Something like 12% within just 6 months.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive result.
Yeah.
And it all started with asking the right questions. You know, this question burst technique really resonates with me. I'm already thinking about how I can apply it to some challenges I'm facing in my own work.
It's a versatile tool.
Yeah.
And speaking of versatile tools, No Girl's article introduces another great framework for sparking curiosity and driving change.
Okay.
And it revolves around asking beautiful questions.
Okay, I'll admit that phrase sounds a little, well, fluffy at first,
I know, right?
but I'm intrigued. What exactly makes a question beautiful?
This concept comes from Warren Berger, who wrote the book A More Beautiful Question. He argues that the most effective questions are those that make us think differently, challenge our assumptions, and ultimately lead to positive change. And he provides a really practical framework for crafting these questions, the why, what if, and how framework.
So it's a three-pronged approach.
Yes.
Using different types of questions to explore a challenge from multiple angles.
Yeah.
I like where this is going. Break it down for me. What does each type of question do?
Why? Questions are all about getting to the root cause of a problem.
Okay.
They challenge the status quo and force you to dig deeper. For example, instead of simply accepting that customer satisfaction is declining, you might ask, why are our customers less satisfied than they used to be?
So it's about understanding the underlying reasons,
Yes.
not just addressing the symptoms.
Exactly.
I can see how that would lead to more effective solutions.
Then you have what-if questions. These are the sparks of creativity and innovation. They encourage you to think outside the box and imagine alternative scenarios. For instance, you might ask, what if we offered a completely new type of service that no one else is doing? It's about opening up possibilities.
And seeing what emerges. I love that. It reminds me of that famous George Bernard Shaw quote. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man.
Oh,
It's those what-if questions that challenge the status quo and drive progress.
that's a brilliant connection. And finally, you have the how questions. These are the more practical, action-oriented questions. They're about figuring out how to make those what-if ideas a reality. So you might ask, how can we test this new service idea with a small group before launching it fully?
So it's a progression, right?
Yes.
You start by understanding the problem,
Yeah.
why, then explore possibilities, what if, and finally figure out how to make it happen, how.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that this framework can be applied to almost any challenge, whether it's a business problem, a personal dilemma, or even a creative project.
The article gives an example of a retail company using this framework to boost customer loyalty. They were struggling with customers making one-time purchases and then never coming back. A pretty common problem for businesses.
They started by asking the why question. Why aren't customers returning after their first purchase? And this led them to realize that their post-purchase experience was lacking. There was no follow-up, no attempt to build a relationship.
It's like they were treating each transaction as a one-night stand instead of a long-term relationship.
Exactly.
They were missing out on all that potential repeat business.
And once they realized this, they moved on to the what-if question. What if we could make every customer feel like a VIP? This sparked a brainstorming session where they came up with ideas for personalized loyalty programs, exclusive content, and other ways to provide value for repeat customers.
And then, of course, they had to figure out how to implement those ideas.
Right. That's where the how questions came in. They asked things like, how can we pilot this program with a small group of customers, and how can we measure the success of this program? This helped them develop a practical plan for testing and implementing their new loyalty strategies.
Did it work?
The article says that their pilot program with their top 100 customers led to a significant increase in repeat purchases. So it seems they were on the right track.
That's a fantastic example of how asking beautiful questions can lead to tangible results.
It makes me wonder, how do you avoid getting stuck in the why phase?
That's a great question.
It's easy to get bogged down in analysis paralysis, especially when you're dealing with a complex problem.
You're right. That highlights the importance of balancing curiosity with action.
Hmm.
You don't want to get so caught up in asking why that you never move on to exploring solutions.
It's about finding that sweet spot between inquiry and action. Exactly. Now, Nogueral goes on to share a case study about a manufacturing company that used both the question burst and the beautiful questions framework to address some serious internal challenges. This case study is particularly interesting because it shows how these frameworks can be used in a more structured setting.
Okay, let's dive into that. What were the challenges this company was facing?
They were facing a classic problem, misalignment, among their leadership team,
I,
which, as you can imagine, led to all sorts of issues.
I can imagine.
Stalled growth, inefficiencies, a lot of frustration.
The dreaded silo effect. Sounds like they needed a serious injection of collaboration and shared vision.
Exactly. And that's where Miguel Nogueral came in. They brought him in to facilitate a one-day leadership team workshop focused on using curiosity to break down those silos and get everyone on the same page.
Okay, so how did they use curiosity to tackle these challenges?
The first part of the workshop focused on building awareness. They started by conducting empathy interviews with key stakeholders, department heads, production managers, even some customers.
That's smart. Getting input from all levels of the organization, and even from external perspectives.
Right. And during these interviews, they focused on asking open-ended questions to really understand the pain points and frustrations of each stakeholder. Things like, what are your biggest frustrations with our current processes? And what do you wish the leadership team understood about your role?
So they were digging deep, trying to uncover those hidden assumptions and unspoken challenges.
Exactly. And through this process, they uncovered three key insights. One, each department was prioritizing its own goals over company-wide objectives, which was creating a lot of inefficiency. Two, there was a lack of strategic clarity, with employees receiving conflicting directives from different leaders. And three, there were gaps in the customer experience, with inconsistent lead times and poor communication.
Wow, so just by taking the time to ask the right questions, they uncovered some pretty significant issues.
It's amazing what you can discover when you approach a problem with genuine curiosity. And they didn't stop there. They then used Hal Gregersen's question burst technique to dive even deeper into the challenge of leadership misalignment.
So they brought the leadership team together and started bombarding the issue with questions.
Exactly. They spent about 20 minutes brainstorming as many questions as possible about why the leadership team was struggling to align on priorities, without trying to answer them right away.
I can picture it now, a whiteboard covered in questions.
Yeah.
Some of them probably pretty provocative.
I'm sure there were a few eyebrow raisers in the mix, but that's the point of the question burst, to push beyond the obvious and uncover those hidden assumptions. Some of the key questions that emerged were, why are departmental goals misaligned with company strategy? What assumptions are we making about how we communicate priorities? And what if we eliminated traditional performance metrics and focused on collaboration?
Those are some tough questions,
They are.
but also essential ones to ask if you want to create real change.
And by asking these disruptive questions, they had a major realization. The real issue wasn't just poor communication, it was a lack of a unified strategy. Each leader was operating from their own silo, without a shared understanding of the company's long-term goals.
So the misalignment wasn't intentional, it was a symptom of a deeper problem.
Exactly. And once they had this realization, they could start to work on developing a shared vision and a more collaborative approach.
It's like they finally had a shared map to navigate by,
Yeah.
instead of everyone wandering around in their own separate territories.
Right. And that's where Warren Berger's beautiful questions framework came in. They used the why, what if, and how questions to reframe their challenges and start exploring potential solutions.
So what were some of the questions they asked?
Well, they started with the why questions again, digging deeper into the reasons behind the misalignment. They asked things like, why do we have so many layers of approval for simple decisions? And why aren't we involving frontline employees in the strategic planning process?
So they were challenging those ingrained processes and hierarchies, looking for ways to streamline and empower.
Exactly. Then they moved on to the what if questions. This is where they let their imaginations run wild, envisioning new ways of working together. They asked things like, what if we had cross functional teams working on key initiatives? And what if we created a more transparent decision making process?
It's so important to create that space for imaginative thinking, to break free from those old patterns and explore what's possible.
Absolutely. And finally, they landed on the how questions. This is where they started to get practical, figuring out how to implement those new ideas. They asked things like, how can we create a culture that values collaboration over competition? And how can we measure the impact of these changes on our business goals?
So they were moving from the theoretical to the actionable, developing concrete plans to turn those what-ifs into reality.
Exactly. And they didn't just stop at brainstorming. They actually put some of these ideas into practice. They decided to pilot two initiatives, monthly strategy syncs between department heads and team collaboration metrics,
Okay.
to track their progress.
So they were testing the waters before rolling out these changes company-wide.
It is. And according to the article, these pilot programs had some really positive results. After 6 months, they saw a decrease in operational delays, greater leadership alignment, and improved employee morale.
That's fantastic. It sounds like their curiosity-driven approach really paid off.
It did. And the leadership team was so impressed with the results that they committed to continuing these initiatives and making them a permanent part of their company culture.
This case study is so inspiring. It shows that even deeply ingrained organizational challenges can be addressed with the power of the right questions.
It does. And it highlights the importance of creating a culture of curiosity within organizations, where people are encouraged to ask questions, challenge assumptions, and constantly seek better ways of doing things.
So how can our listeners start applying these ideas in their own lives and work? What are some practical takeaways?
Well, No Girl offers some excellent advice in the article. He suggests using question bursts for problem solving, adopting the why, what if, how framework for brainstorming, and creating a questioning culture within your team or organization.
Those are some great starting points.
Yeah.
But it can be daunting, right, to try and shift an entire team's mindset, especially if you're in a culture that values having the answers over asking questions.
You're absolutely right. It takes time and consistency to build a culture of curiosity, but it's so worth it. When people feel safe to ask questions and challenge the status quo, that's when true innovation happens.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools for approaching challenges and sparking innovation.
Me too. I'm particularly excited about trying out that question burst technique. I have a feeling it's going to come in handy.
And on that note, we'd love to leave you with a final question to ponder. What's one beautiful question you can ask yourself or your team this week to spark new ideas or solve a challenging problem?
It doesn't have to be earth-shattering, just something that nudges you out of your comfort zone and sparks your curiosity.
This has been such a fascinating exploration of curiosity-driven leadership. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of what's possible when we embrace the power of questions.
Absolutely. Curiosity is a superpower, and it's available to all of us.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the power of curiosity. Until next time, stay curious.